Finally. The show's timeline is back on track. Yep, this new episode finally puts the story back in the present, and honestly, I couldn't be happier. While I did like the deep dive into these characters' pasts in the last episode, it's been quite a while since we got a good old-fashioned IMP causing clusterfuck episode. This episode is special though, because that isn't all it does. It also decides to toss Stolas' family drama into the usual formula, to great success. Hell, they even managed to fit a little bit of Blitz's past trauma stuff in here involving Luna without dropping the ball. This episode was a great mix of both aspects of what people love about Helluva, and I'm going to explain why. So the plot of this episode is rather straightforward. Octavia, who's finally a character again in this show, really wants to see this meteor shower thing with her dad, based on a promise he made like a decade ago. He's too busy fighting with Stella to do that though, so she steals Stolas' book to go see it herself. So the rest of the episode is basically just Blitz, Stolas, and the rest of the IMP trying to find her in the human world. They quickly get split up though, and get up to various forms of shenanigans. In the end, Luna of all people is the one who finds Octavia and brings her back after a pretty emotional conversation. The episode then ends with all of them watching the shower together, and also a conclusion to Millie and Moxie's underwritten roles in the episode. While all this is going on, Blitz is having a bit of a conflict with Luna, as he's trying to get her to change her attitude. An impossible task. We also get to see how he ended up adopting her, which is something that the fandom has been wanting forever. You know, something I love about Helluva is how it manages to take the simplest of plots and execute them wonderfully by filling them with the exciting and interesting aspects of their story. This episode is no different. It takes all the themes that it can realistically utilize with the backgrounds it has and established personalities and actions of the characters and explores them amazingly. It truly is something special. So let's explore these details that it uses to its advantage to make the simple plot amazing. So this episode opens up like no episode of this show has before. It shows us Stolas explaining an astrological phenomenon called Azathoth's Tears. Apparently, it's this super rare and super special meteor shower thing. We see that Stolas is actually explaining all of this to baby Octavia, a character that I honestly wasn't expecting to see again. She really wants to see those tears with Stolas, and he says yes. Once they're here, we can watch them together. One recycled transition later, and we're back to the present, and the stars are happening today. So Octavia goes to mention it to her dad, and holy shit, is she actually happy? That's almost unheard of. It is so nice to see her not be miserable, and I spoke way too soon. Yeah, it turns out Stolas is far too busy bickering with his wife to care about this right now. So Octavia, in a moment of rage, decides to sneak off to the human world and watch the stars herself. In order to do this, however, she has to get Stolas' book, which is currently in possession of the IMP. So when she's breaking into the IMP's office, we get to see what's going on today at the IMP HQ. And this is where we get introduced to the secondary bit of drama that's going on in this episode, which is that Blitz is trying to be a bit more assertive with Luna. As expected, it goes very poorly because, well, there's a pretty obvious power difference here. Blitz does manage to get a leg up, though, when, with Moxie's approval, he threatens to replace Luna as his receptionist. While this is happening, Octavia is breaking in and stealing the book, and holy shit, who animated this? So the IMP realize that something's going on, and arrive just in time to see Octavia going through the portal. And the next thing we see is her thrust into the human world. More specifically, LA, which is arguably a worse place than the one she just left. Right off the bat, Octavia gets jostled around by a bunch of humans in a very chaotic scene. You know the kind, where a character enters a different realm and gets a bunch of new otherworldly things thrown at them inside of just a couple minutes, while they're just kind of freaking out at the sight of everything. This scene lasts for about 30 seconds, and then we get a cut back to IMP, and Blitz is panicking, trying to figure out what to do. Eventually, he just calls Stolas and tells him, and yeah, he reacts exactly the way you'd expect him to. That happens in about 45 seconds, and then we get a cut back to Octavia on Earth. The only thing that really happens here is that she gets on a tour bus, thinking that it's going to take her to the stars. Then we get a cut back to the IMP, and we see them getting chewed up by Stolas for all of 5 seconds. And then Luna smells piss and determines that they went to LA, so off they go. Once they're there on Earth, Stolas and Luna get their human disguises on, and Stolas looks a lot less different than I was expecting, to be honest. Yeah, this is literally just him without his owl motif. That's not a complaint. It's not like much would be different if he looked drastically different. It's just an observation. Anyways, they then go off. And this segment is the first one in a while that's actually over a minute long. Yeah, I'm not a super big fan of the lightning past 40 or so second segments that they did for this part. And I think that the whole thing would have just kind of flowed better with a few less cuts. Like, all the stuff we saw Octavia do in this span literally could have all been strung together at once due to how little time it actually takes up. And then after we see that, we could cut back to the IMP and see their response. This is a minor critique, but it's still something that I thought I should point out. A much larger critique I have is what they do in the very next scene. They decide to dump Moxie and Millie into an off-screen side quest for the whole episode, and have them do basically nothing the whole time. It's kind of like what they did in Lululand, but not nearly as funny or engaging. They also drop Moxie's IQ to single digits for this episode, just so that the side story can happen, having him turn into an idiot who can be coerced into buying street vendors' junk with almost no effort, which is something I definitely don't like. Moxie is one of my favorite characters in this entire show, and he's supposed to be the smart one, so to see him dumbed down and stuck doing this stupid shit for the whole episode, just because the writers clearly couldn't think of something better for him to do, just kind of rubs me the wrong way. They even went as far as to make him even more of a cuck than he already is at the end, which is just, I mean, come on guys, would it really kill you to let my man have one thing in life? Anyways, after this scene, the episode enters its middle with the divergence of its story into two different ones. One involving Blitz and Stola screwing around in a TV station, and the other involving Luna actually trying to find Octavia. So because Stolas' magic was too weak to conjure up anyone else's disguises, Blitz resorts to a regular costume to hide his identity, even though he totally didn't have to because there's now 3 undisguised demons on Earth and literally no one cares. However, he gets mistaken for a celebrity with a name suspiciously close to Brandon Rogers. This causes him to get mobbed by paparazzi, then dragged to a TV studio to shoot a show that the actor they think he is stars in. They also take Stolas too because he claims that he's the actor's agent. Before being dragged away, Blitz tells Luna to go look for Octavia so the rest of the episode can happen. Speaking of Octavia, we see her for a brief second, and we see that she's following anything around LA that's star-related in an attempt to find the stars. Back to Blitz and Stolas, Blitz is pushed on set despite not having any idea of what to do. And this is probably the point where I should talk about the portrayal of humans in this episode. This episode is the first in the whole show to really explore the human world outside of what little we saw in Spring Broken. They behave in pretty much the same way though. Humans in the Helluva Boss universe just kind of seem to be these idiotic, mean, comic relief standing characters for the most part. I think this archetype is something that works well in certain instances of the show, but honestly, it got to be a little annoying in this episode. It makes me kind of glad that the writers decided to make most of the show's stories take place exclusively in Hell, as opposed to spending a ton of time focused on the IMP's murder misadventures on Earth like they did in episodes 1 and 3. Despite this though, I think that the humans' behavior in this episode served as a perfect way to get an IMP clusterfuck to happen, which is a good thing. So Blitz starts improvising on stage, we get some Stolas fuel, and then boom, we're back to the Octavia plotline, which in my opinion is far more interesting than anything that happens with Blitz and Stolas in the entire middle of this episode. We don't see Octavia directly, but we do get some of Luna trying to find her. It ends up being pretty easy, as Octavia has been posting selfies in front of all sorts of human landmarks, and posting them on Hell Instagram, so all Luna has to do is just follow the pictures. Then we cut back to the TV studio, and Blitz is still just kind of doing his thing, improvising on stage. We then get a scene that the Helluva Boss fandom has been waiting for years, but something that I personally care very little about. We finally get to see how Blitz adopted Luna. It happens because one of the scenes that they're doing in the show involves dog adoption, and it ends up causing Blitz to lose his shit and start destroying stuff. But that's after the incredibly dramatic and played-for-feels flashback we get. This scene is obviously put in here to satisfy the fanbase, but I think the writers were also trying to use it as a vessel to give Luna a bit of a softer side, which makes sense because we actually do get to see more of that later in the episode. Either way, I just don't care about this flashback much, and I kind of just see it as the creators trying to bow down to the desires of the fandom. You can't even really make the argument that it was strictly for the purposes of making Luna sympathetic, because there's another scene in this episode that does that much better without pulling the hard life and adoption center card. Besides, even if Luna has a softer side, I really don't think it matters that much, because this show has made it rather obvious that Luna's dominant personality trait is definitely just bitchy. I doubt us seeing this quote-unquote softer side is going to become a regular thing. You know, I actually had a "well, I'm in danger because Luna fans" joke written in the script, but I don't even think it's necessary anymore, because there definitely aren't any of them left watching after the other videos I've made. I've made it clear that I don't like Luna since day one. Anyways, as I mentioned before, this flashback, which apparently Blitz saw too, makes him freak out, and this is where the whole clusterfuck thing starts. You may remember in the transition, I said that this middle was the worst part of the episode, and I stand by that claim, as almost everything here was either something I felt neutral about or something I didn't like. This ending where Blitz goes crazy is probably the only thing in the middle that I actually did enjoy. I thought everything here was pretty funny, and I was laughing and smiling the whole time, as I usually do when the IMP is comedically destroying shit. The only thing I didn't like was the overused kids are little assholes joke that they slip in here, as well as this fucking Stolas shot with the cheesy music swelling in the background. Funnily enough, my thoughts on both of these scenes can be summarized with the same meme. Alright, I get it! Anyways, after the sequence, we cut back to Luna and officially enter the ending portion of the episode. So Luna's finally found Octavia, and this is where that actually good scene with Luna comes in. But before I talk about that, I have to ask you, was I the only one who thought seeing these two interact was kind of weird? Like, watching this, I felt exactly how I did when Lalo and Howard Hamlin met in Better Call Saul, like it was some weird crossover episode. Turns out this crossover was what ended up being the thing that made Luna not act horrible for once. Honestly, the fact that Octavia is the one person that Luna is actually friendly to kind of makes sense, seeing as they both hate their dads, for different reasons. Their dads are actually something that these two discuss in this conversation, but first, Octavia starts crying because despite having spent the whole day looking for somewhere to see these stars, she can't actually see them because of the smog. They then actually start talking about their dads, and oh my god, it's Better Call Saul again. I knew it was all connected. I knew I wasn't crazy. Anyways, they start talking about dads. Luna mentions how worried Stolas is about her, and Octavia says, yeah, sure, that's why you're here instead of him. She also asks why Stolas seems to hate her mom more than he loves her, which is probably one of the most emotionally impactful lines from this entire show. Luna basically says that family shit is messy, and that just because dads fuck up sometimes doesn't mean that they don't care. She also says that Stolas is in LA somewhere looking for her. She finishes by saying that Stolas is trying, and that's what really counts. Mid-conversation, she also realizes that what she's saying applies to her own dad as well, which will hopefully make her less cold towards Blitz, and, never mind, though. The first thing that she does after going through the portal is smash his nuts with a smile. Yeah, this character's definitely still a bitch. I don't give a fuck what people say. I love how there are literally people in this fandom who will die on the hill that Luna is not actually horrible due to blink and you'll miss it facial expressions. I mean, you gotta love that furry logic. Anyways, Stolas and Octavia are back together again, so they hug, and Stolas is having the reaction you'd expect from a parent reconnecting with their child after they go missing. The whole, I'm glad you're okay, but why did you do that thing? Octavia reminds him of the stars, and Stolas starts apologizing. But due to the conversation Octavia just had with Luna, she's just like, it's alright. Then, right on cue, the meteor shower starts happening right after the conversation is finished. What's funny is that I'm pretty sure this meteor shower in the show is actually based off something similar that happens in real life. As a matter of fact, you can see it. All you have to do is live in the US and go outside next July 4th, and you'll see the real thing that the show bases meteor shower on. It's actually pretty cool. After this, the episode shows us how Millie and Moxie's side plot end, which is where the cuck thing that I mentioned earlier happens. Unfortunately, that sour note is how this episode concludes. In my headcanon, Millie and Moxie just stay behind in hell for this one, making the real end of the episode the main gang watching the fire, as last tears. This episode was, overall, pretty good. I think that in terms of its emotional beats, this episode actually hits harder than episode 2. That's probably because the thing that I disliked about episode 2 most is that it almost felt like they pulled that kind of emotion too damn early. They introduced us to Octavia in that episode, and then they used her to produce an emotional conflict, which did work well, but in retrospect it didn't have much behind it. This episode has a whole season full of character development, plus one episode of season 2 behind it, making the message a lot stronger. That conversation between Luna and Octavia kind of felt like everything the creators wanted the conversation between Stolas and Octavia in episode 2 to be. Something I didn't like about this episode, though, was how little of its runtime was actually dedicated to this arguably more interesting aspect of it. I really liked the beginning of the episode, but it honestly kind of started to lose me in the middle, when all we were seeing was Blitz screwing around in a TV station and Luna running around LA. I didn't really find any of it particularly funny or interesting, and I felt extremely neutral about the whole thing. And when I wasn't feeling that way, I was feeling irritated at some of the dumber things they did, like that flashback and the side plot they threw Eminem into. It did start to pick up at the end, though, with Blitz destroying the station, and of course that awesome conversation between Octavia and Luna. I can say without a doubt that I actually didn't hate Luna for a couple minutes of this episode. I mean, it didn't last, but it was nice while it did, I guess. So yeah, all things considered, this was a really good episode. I liked most of it, and I thought some parts of it were really exceptional, but honestly, that middle kind of drags the score down by a decent amount for me. I'm gonna give it a 7.5 out of 10. I definitely watch it over Ozzy's, but there's no way it tops anything else currently above it. Also, a bit of an alteration to the score chart. Lululand is now a 9 out of 10 instead of a 10 out of 10. I still think it's really good, but I no longer think it's the perfect episode. I also do think that a 10 out of 10 is going to happen in this season at some point, though. So yeah, that's all I have for today. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Be sure to subscribe, comment, like, and share this video around. Bye.